All right, welcome back everybody to day 2 of the National Science Board meeting. The first item this morning is our panel discussion on lessons from minority serving institutions, or MSIs. And I'm grateful to Jerry Richmond, chair of the board's External Engagement Committee, and the NSB Vice Chair, Victor McCrary, for initiating and orchestrating this discussion, and to our panelists for joining us today. I also wanted to thank NSF for the informative overview and background on NSF's MSI programs that was provided in our board book. So Jerry, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Ellen. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel presentation on the successes of minority serving institutions. Now, before we start, I would like to ask board members and others in attendance to please turn off your cameras and mute your microphones during the presentations. So when we started putting this panel together, NSB Vice Chair Victor McCrary immediately sprang to mind as the perfect person to host it. Vic has a rich history of working with HBCUs, previously at Morgan State University and currently at the University of the District of Columbia. In fact, Dr. McCrary is a proud graduate of Howard University here in the nation's capital. Vic has thought about and worked on supporting minority serving institutions for years, and along with others has been an essential voice on the board, especially as it developed and now implements a 10-year vision for S&E enterprise. So Vic, we are so pleased to have you host this important panel. So please, I turn it over to you now, Vic.
Thank you very much, Jerry, and thank you for your advocacy throughout the years on the board and off the board in support of minority serving institutions and what they bring in the areas of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So thanks to you. Appreciate that very much. You know, we have an exciting panel that should generate vigorous discussion. The board's vision for 2030 includes a diverse STEM educated workforce, an inclusive STEM ecosystem to attract and retain STEM talent, and equitable policies, practices, and procedures to create innovative and sustainable systemic change so that the S&E enterprise is much more reflective, you know, of the communities S&E regularly impacts, and that's all of our communities. As it stands now, millions are missing from the S&E enterprise. To recruit and reclaim those missing millions, as we say, we must look to those who do it best, and that is our country's minority serving institutions. The panel NSB hosted in February focused on roadblocks, particularly for the missing millions, in obtaining a graduate STEM education. And again, I want to shout out again for you, Jerry, for your advocacy on this issue. Yet they are flourishing in minority serving institutions, or MSIs. From historically Black colleges and universities to tribal colleges and universities to Hispanic serving institutions and beyond, MSIs hold the key to educating people from underrepresented groups and STEM. And if you don't believe me, you can look at the report from the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine entitled Minority Serving Institutions, America's Underutilized Resource for Strengthening the STEM Workforce. It came out in 2019. Very comprehensive study that talks about the successes that MSIs do in developing the STEM workforce. So the question is, how do they do it? What can further higher education institutions learn from them? And we're talking about predominantly white institutions. How can we further support their successes? And in turn, our nation's successes at building a robust and diverse domestic STEM workforce. I want to also at this point in time, give a shout out to my board colleagues who have weighed in on this subject, and to our board chair, Dr. Ellen Ochoa, for her leadership in this area, as well as NSF's program managers, assistant directors, and also Director Sethanathan Panthanathan, who have worked hand in hand in trying to address the issues of the missing millions. Today's panelists will highlight data and successful strategies to develop and train students throughout the post-secondary STEM pipeline at MSIs. Each panelist will speak for 5 minutes, after which we will have a question and answer session, and I really ask the board to really participate. We will start off our session with Dr. Thai-Huy Nguyen. Dr. Nguyen is a policy researcher at the RAND Corporation and a senior research associate at Rutgers Center for Minority Serving Institutions. He will highlight data on minority serving institutions and their contributions to diversifying the STEM educated workforce. Our second speaker is Dr. Alter Tinoco, is a tenured associate professor of chemistry at the University of Puerto Rico, Rio Piedras, a Hispanic serving institution. Dr. Tinoco is engaged in several traineeship programs, including NSFs, REU program. He will address the value and the unique approaches to mentorship and training at HSIs. Our third panelist is Dr. Twyla Baker, president of Nueta Hidatsa College, a tribal college in North Dakota. Dr. Baker will talk about the importance of community and culturally relevant STEM training among Native students. Our fourth panelist is Dr. Ronald Mason. He is president of the University of the District of Columbia, the only public historically Black college and university in the nation's capital. Dr. Mason will highlight systemic challenges and opportunities for MSIs, especially HBCUs. And our final panelist is Evan Nguyen. He is an NSF graduate research fellow at astrophysics graduate student at the California Institute of Technology and a graduate of El Camino College and Cal State Polytechnic University. And I assume once he finishes, he will be Dr. Evan Nguyen Pomona, both Hispanic serving institutions. He will talk about the ongoing positive impact of MSIs on his STEM training. At the end of this presentation, again, we invite board members to turn their cameras back on and start the question and answer period. I will now turn to Thai-Huy to start his presentation. Thai-Huy?
Thank you so much, Dr. McCrary. Very much appreciate your introduction, and thank you everyone for the opportunity to speak about MSIs. Very quickly, what I'll be trying to do is just providing a very quick overview of minority serving institutions that will sort of set the tone for the other panelists who will really sort of go in depth and provide more details about how wonderful or what their institutions are doing to really help minority students succeed in the sciences. May I have the first slide, please? Great, thank you so much. So minority serving institutions, or what we like to call MSIs, MSIs are a growing sector of American higher education. And when I say sector, what I mean is that there are 4-year and 2-year institutions that have been given these sort of racialized designations. And I consider them the future of American higher education because as many of us know, this country will become a majority minority, right? So there are more people of color who are also enrolling in American higher education. And they are changing the face of our colleges and universities. So MSIs collectively, I actually just got some updated numbers today. They educate about 30% of all undergraduate students and 40% of students of color, despite only representing 15% of all American colleges and universities. So as we think about broadening access to STEM education and success in STEM education, MSIs certainly play a role in that. If you don't believe me, NSF every year produces a listing of the best schools that do a wonderful job of awarding STEM degrees to minority students, and many MSIs make up the bulk of those rankings. On the right side of this particular slide, for those who may not be aware, there are a slew of different MSIs that are focused on supporting particular racial groups. Although I do want to be clear that these institutions, despite their designations, do a great job of supporting a variety of students. So the first one very quickly, these titles are quite long. So Asian American and Native American Pacific Islander Serving Institution, and there are about 252 in this country. And they are driven by an enrollment designation. So what that means is that institutions are given these designations based on their enrollment of a particular target group. So in the case of Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander serving institutions, they are required to have at least 10% AAPI students, and half of their undergraduate body must be Pell eligible, which is a proxy for being low income. And then we have historically Black colleges and universities. They're about 101 to 107. There's a range because there are some campuses, unfortunately, that have closed in the past few years, but researchers continue to want to recognize their legacy, so hence that range. And they are a historical driven MSI, in part because these particular campuses have a historic mission of serving and supporting Black communities. And then we have Hispanic Serving Institutions that enroll Latinx students. And this particular designation is driven by enrollment, where HSIs must have at least 25% Latinx students and 50% of their undergraduate body must be Pell eligible. And they're around 500 to 23 to 600, depending on which organization that you speak to. And then we have Native American Serving Non-Tribal Institutions, which is also enrollment driven. There are about 6 of them across the country. And we have predominantly Black institutions, which are similar to Black colleges, but they are driven by enrollment. And there are about 58 of them across the country and growing every year. And then lastly, we have our tribal colleges and universities. There are about 32 of them, a bulk of them 2-year colleges, and they are driven by a historical mission as well as a focus on self-determination. Next slide, please. So why are MSIs successful? Why do we see so many of them on NSF's annual list of highly ranked schools that are doing a great job of supporting minority students in the sciences? Well, to really understand their success, we have to also understand their history. So MSIs are colleges and universities that enroll a great number of minority students. And for many of those who may understand the history of American higher education in this country, we don't have a great record of supporting those institutions. And so oftentimes these colleges and universities are quite under-resourced, and they have a long history that have been documented by case studies, historical work that demonstrate that MSIs are quite adaptive and very innovative, and they tend to do a great deal with a lot less resources. So whenever I speak to a funder or even an agent, I always tell them, like, imagine what they can do if they were just given a bit more support. And then secondly, I would say what really contributes to their ongoing contemporary success in this country as it relates to STEM is that MSIs, especially Black colleges, HSIs, and tribal colleges and ANAPESIs are at the forefront of advancing racial equity in STEM education. And many of you might be wondering, well, why? Is it just enough to have a significant number of minority students? And based on my own work, what I would suggest is that MSIs are leaders at this work is because when organizations are given these organizational identities and designations, they have an anchor that allows them to guide their work to better support their students. And so what are the consequences of those organizational identities? What does it mean to be a Black college, to be an ANAPESI? And so based on my own work, I have learned that by adopting these designations, institutions push back against dominant cultural norms. So they push back against what they believe are the standards for STEM achievement. They push back against those assumptions to ensure that more students are allowed these opportunities. They really promote inclusive training and pedagogy. What does that mean? They deviate from, again, these sort of dominant understandings of how we teach students, how we train future scientists. They recruit a great deal of faculty and researchers of color that are not just committed to advancing the sciences, but also truly committed to ensuring that students just like them have opportunities to succeed in this space. So a lot of the scholarship that we know about MSIs demonstrate faculty's commitment, not just to research, but also to student development and to their learning. Next slide, please. And then lastly, I want to sort of provide an example of the work that I've been doing lately with ANAPESIs, or what we call Asian American and Native American Pacific Islander Serving Institutions, and give you all sort of a more in-depth understanding of this particular type. So they enroll nearly 40% of AAPI students, or Asian American Pacific Islander undergraduates. And interestingly enough, a little over half of all ANAPESIs are community colleges, not four-year schools, not research-intensive institutions. And the reason why these institutions are so special is because Asian American Pacific Islander students, they really struggle with the perceptions that people have about their success. There's something called the model minority myth that assumes that all Asian American students and Pacific Islander students are universally successful, and that's not true. And so these institutions, because of their designations, they really adopt this understanding of serving Asian American students and understand that there's significant diversity across different ethnic groups, and really try to overcome these very dominant understandings of AAPI students to truly serve students who are diverse, not just in income and ethnicity, but also language, immigration status, first generation status. And so a lot of my work suggests and shows how ANAPESIs can become a great source to promote success in science for AAPI students. So I'll stop there, and I want to thank you all for your time. Thank you.
Thai-Huy, thank you for a wonderful presentation and a wonderful overview. And just to underscore what your presentation implied, the Census Bureau has said by 2045 will be a minority majority nation. So the impact of these institutions is only going to grow. Next, we have Arthur. Arthur, would you please start your presentation now?
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be invited to this panel, and thank you to the organizers, the National Science Board. So two key ideas that I want to emphasize, and that my fellow panelists will as well, are inclusivity and sustainability. So I grew up in the Harlem, New York City area in a predominantly African-American neighborhood. There were also Latinos there. And I grew up in the District 5 schooling system. This was the late 1980s and 1990s. So you can say that I've always grown up in a minority serving school system. So schools in the District 5 system were severely and are severely underfunded, and thus had limited resources. But what really stood out for several of us was the tireless effort of the teaching and the administrative staff in terms of enabling us to think beyond our limits, to be more resourceful, and to always let us know that we were just as capable and just as smart as those rich kids who had much more. So as I advanced in my schooling and entered into non-minority serving institutions, that impression of being able to achieve what I wanted was ingrained in me. So now as a professor in a Hispanic serving institution, I see that same message, that same vision being communicated, and it is supremely empowering. Next slide, please. So Hispanic serving institutions have existed for a very long time. Congress formally recognized them in 1992 and allotted specific funds for them. So each year this number fluctuates because of the definition of the student population. We have approximately 500 spread over 2-year and 4-year programs. Historically, with regards to broadening the STEM population, the primary focus of HSIs has been to establish more spaces for increasing accessibility to higher education. So there are some really important statistics to be aware of. So HSIs enroll nearly 2/3 of all Latinos in post-secondary education, confer greater than 40% of all bachelor's degrees and greater than 60% of all associate degrees. And something that's extremely valuable is that there is a concerted effort for inclusivity. And in that is a particular targeting of non-traditional students. And who are these non-traditional students? Well, they are older adult learners, so delay their education for a variety of reasons. Low-income students, first-generation college goers, non-native English speakers, immigrant students, and those that are balancing work and family. And these students have been very receptive to these outreach efforts because they see education as a worthy investment. So HSIs enroll a largely non-traditional student body. But creating and expanding spaces is no longer enough. According to a 2021 report by the Pew Research Center, in recent years, the Latino gap in the STEM workforce has not narrowed. So Latinos make up 8% of all STEM workers, despite constituting 70% of the employment sector. So now HSIs work even harder to create support systems to circumvent this professional roadblock. Next slide, please. All right, so the main objective of the support system is establishing sustainable ones. So what are these support systems? Well, for instance, there are community outreach efforts with local high schools and even younger schools and nonprofit organizations to inform about the institutions and their opportunities. In addition, there are enrichment language courses to enable students to transition to college level courses taught in English. There are also efforts to integrate the family, to make them more knowledgeable about what it means to get a higher education, to be able to appreciate it. And this is through implementation of bilingual workshops. In addition, there are cultural competency workshops for faculty to make them more aware of the unique struggles that students are going through that will allow them to understand what it takes in order to provide for these students so that they can be successful. There are student support services such as financial aid, fellowship opportunities, more awareness of these, more initiatives to get students to really apply for their own fellowships. There is guidance counseling, job fairs. So there is a really pronounced effort to be intentional in terms of servicing the Latino and the diverse student body. Next slide, please. And so HSIs are not really a homogeneous body of schools. That's obvious. Their underlying missions are very much defined by their geographical location and their historical background. So I can attest to this working in the school system that I work in now at the University of Puerto Rico. So as a territory of the United States, Puerto Rico has a complicated identity. And this actually serves as a major inspiration in the University of Puerto Rico's vision to promote the preservation of identity and culture. So the UPR system was established in 1903. It consists of 11 campuses, 8 of which are primarily undergraduate institutions, 3 offer master's and PhD degrees. From 2014 to 2018, granted the largest number of doctorate degrees to Latinos in the United States. There is a significant population of females. So in the chemistry departments of the graduate programs of the UPR, we have greater than a 50% female population. So what is it that we offer? And we offer a diversity of traineeships for different levels of academic preparation. We have a number of traineeships for high schoolers, undergraduate students, graduate students. And there is a large emphasis on a family dynamic. So family is really important in the Latino culture. So it's quite common to see this dual principal investigator, senior student mentorship that integrates even the youngest researchers into the laboratory environment. Some of the, I would say non-minority schools may not necessarily appreciate younger researchers in the laboratory environment. In these traineeships, there's a large focus on entrepreneurship, pharmaceutical industry, a major field in Puerto Rico. Also efforts to really focus on renewable energy and clean water, directions that the workforce is really taking and exploring. And also, given our recent history of dealing with natural disasters, Hurricane Maria as an example, months of no electricity, running water, poor internet access, there's a great emphasis on perseverance, conserving resources, and really developing skill sets to transition to the workforce. And so again, the two key things, inclusivity and sustainability, and that's really what's allowing us to thrive and really moving forward and helping us to overcome that professional roadblocks. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Arthur. I had the blessing of visiting your campus there at that time. Dr. Carlos Cabrera was leading a lot of the materials research chemistry there, outstanding laboratories. I was very impressed with the students and their presentation. So yes, UPR is definitely a national asset. We'll now turn to Twyla. Twyla?
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here with you all. I introduce myself in my Hidatsa language. My name is Woman of Knowledge in Hidatsa. My English name is Dr. Twyla Baker, and I'm the president of Nueta Hidatsa College, located on the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation in Northwest North Dakota. We're a small institution. We serve a smaller student body, primarily Native American students. To receive the classification of tribal college, you have to serve over 50% Native students. And my percentage is much higher than that, being located on our traditional homelands. TCUs, for those folks who are not so familiar with us, are the youngest institutions of higher education in the United States, serving its oldest people. And we have a have a tradition of resilience. However, resilience is, of course, a blessing and a curse because of the means by which we have had to become resilient. We are a tribally chartered college, which means the MHA Nation or the Mandan Hidatsa Arikara Nation charters us. We fall under the guidelines of all the other higher education institutions that are under Higher Learning Commission accreditation. And we follow all the same rules. However, we have a very different approach to things. I feel as the president of my institution and the first president who was actually younger than the institution itself, what really serves our success in our community is the fact that our culture, our lifeways, our languages, who we are as a people, our identities are tied into the fabric of the institution itself, so much so that it is addressed in our mission. It is a part of what we do. It is central to what we do. And that, for those who aren't too terribly aware of the history, is in direct response to the, I guess, lack of service that we received from mainstream institutions it was only a few generations ago that the tribal college movement actually happened within the lifetime of my parents. So, and that, of course, if you go back further into history with the boarding schools and IRA governments, there's a whole history that we could talk about. Now, the modern iteration of tribal colleges themselves, we have had only about 4 or 5 decades to really catch up to the mainstream institutions. However, and then the past years kind of put everything on light speed. I feel as a tribal college president, we've responded tremendously. A lot of what happens at tribal colleges is centered around STEM, is centered around research. And a lot of that has to do with reconciling our histories, our narratives, and our understanding and knowledge bodies with mainstream knowledge bodies, and to help mainstream science practitioners understand that what we were doing and have been doing since time immemorial is science. It is evidence-based observation over generations. And we also take this opportunity to help our students to understand that what they know of the world, their worldview, their understanding is incredibly valid, in fact, crucial to the understanding of all scientists everywhere. And we can't leave those understandings out, because why would you leave an entire portion of the library untouched? You wouldn't be serving your understanding as a scientist, as a researcher, as an observer of the world, if you're not inclusive of those knowledge bodies. Therefore, we are basically working all the time, not just on the cultural portion, but also on seeing where that kind of meshes, because it is a mesh. They're not at odds with each other. These understandings to help our students to succeed, and it's actually a wonderful practice. It is a success. I am an alumni of this institution as well, so I've come full circle. And I actually happen to have a STEM background. I'm one of the few tribal college presidents with a STEM degree. Like I said, we tie our culture into our mission, and it appears we're doing pretty well. I can speak for my own institution alone. Our sponsored programs, our grants with science agencies and with other research projects rivals my general fund budget. However, the challenges lie within the fact that I don't have enough hands to do the work. We are a small institution. We face the same challenges that community colleges all across the country are facing. Never mind the pandemic, we had those challenges beforehand. The pandemic actually just kind of really shined a light on a lot of the disparities that we are facing. Tribal colleges engage not just our students. We are a seat of the culture. We are very much so tied into the fabric of the communities in which we are a part of, because we tend to be on tribal lands, which are very, very rural. So we do a lot of different things, and I think we do so very successfully, quite honestly. When you think of this, and this is just anecdotal, but my students that came through and graduated just last weekend graduated with the highest GPA average in the history of this college. So we are resilient. Now, imagine if we had the resources and tools and the infrastructure to be able to support more students. So I think that's all I have to share right now until the question and answer period. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Twyla. That was very, very, very interesting. We'll now turn to Ronald. Ronald or Ron?
Ron, Vic, good morning. Thank you all for the opportunity to speak. By way of clarification, Vic said we were the only public HBCU in the District of Columbia. In fact, we are the only public university in the District of Columbia. We are the state system for the district, and we are also a congressionally mandated HBCU. By way of perspective, I've been in leadership roles at universities, predominantly white, and HBCUs for the last 40 years, and 3 HBCU presidencies. And so I'm going to say what you just heard, but with a 40-year perspective, and also the experience of having served on many advisory committee over the years, including NSF. So having said that, this is one of your slides that shows that there's a lot of talent being left on the table. There's large, vast pools of talent among women, Hispanic and Latino and African Americans in America, but we do not know how to identify and refine that talent, which is one of the reasons why America has a talent shortage. The question is why? Next slide. Well, if you look at the numbers and realize that 10% of the population has 77% of the wealth, and 90% of that 10% is white. White people are 60% of the population, but make up 77% of the workforce. And Black people are 13% of the population, but 25% of the people with zero wealth or less. You can only explain those kinds of numbers in one or two ways, especially if you believe that talent at birth is not distributed based on race or social status. Either white people are supreme because they beat the odds consistently over the course of history, or because opportunity in America is actually distributed primarily based on race and social status. And of course, we live in a system in America that does exactly that. It's designed to concentrate and maintain wealth in the hands of a privileged few white people. It gives day-to-day advantages to everyday white people, and thus sowing racial discord, and it eliminates and suppresses talent. Because if you live in this kind of a system that is more or less a rigged competition, then you have to eliminate talent in order to be able to have these outcomes at the end of the process. And two things happen when you do that. One, mediocrity builds in over time, and then two, you end up with the kinds of talent shortages that we're looking at. And so when the CEO of Wells Fargo says, this may sound like an excuse, but the reality is that there's a limited pool of Black talent to recruit from, you know, in some ways he's right, because we live in a system that is suppressing that talent and eliminating it, but also because of the system we live in, it's hard for him to see it because the talent that is there, because our system is not designed to identify and reward that type of talent. So next slide. And preparing for this, this presentation, I was asked, well, why do HBCUs overproduce? You heard Dr. Nguyen's numbers, and it's pretty clear that even though HBCUs are institutional reflections of Black people in America, which means that like Black people, they've always been denied access to wealth, they nevertheless produce great numbers, especially in the STEM fields. And I think it starts with the fact that we accurately diagnose the problem. We don't have any issues with saying that, look, the challenge that we face as institutions and that America faces as institutions is that system. And in short terms, it's a system of white supremacy. And if you don't understand and see that system for what it is, it's very difficult to produce the talent that you need at the end of the process. And so at HBCUs and at UDC, for example, we're trying to recreate the way we think about the talent pipeline, work with employers to help them understand that they can't have their cake and eat it too, that if you don't see the reality of what's standing in the way of the production of talent, we'll never be able to close the talent gap. We'll never be able to close the so-called achievement gap. And at the end of the day, we'll never be able to achieve the dream that we call America, because this system, this rigged system, really does not allow equity to exist. And we cannot achieve equitable outcomes unless we take on this system. I hope that was 5 minutes.
Thank you, Ron. Excellent presentation. I'll now turn to our final panelist, Evan. Evan, please.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much. Very honored to be here. Thank you, everyone. So I get to basically serve as being a face to the most, to recent success of MSIs. So I'm going to start with stepping through my academic journey. So I start at El Camino College in 2014 as I graduated high school. This is a community college and a minority serving institution, as well as a Hispanic serving institution, where, in all honesty, my academic roots were planted here. And so I'm sorry, I had animations here. You can just go through all of them. But at El Camino, I ended up finding myself at University of Wyoming for a summer research internship. And it was here that I was able to confirm that, yes, I actually do want to pursue, a career in astronomy and astrophysics research. While at ELCO, so I finished up my time at El Camino, and as a result of a program that I was introduced to at the University of Wyoming, I found myself at Cal Poly Pomona for my undergraduate to get my bachelor's degree. And I basically got started with research as soon as I got there. And Cal Poly Pomona is located in Pomona, California. It's a Cal State school and also a minority serving institution, as well, again, as a Hispanic serving institution. And as a result of these, years of experience that I've already accrued, I was able to get a summer research internship at the Center for Astrophysics at Harvard, and taking advantage of another program that was available to me at Cal Poly Pomona, I now find myself at Caltech. Next slide. And so what I want to do is kind of step through some of the relevant programming that I took advantage of while I was at the different institutions. And we're going to start with El Camino because this was, again, where the roots of my academic grounding were set in. And so the first program on this list is MESA. And this is basically where I learned how to be a good student and what it meant to be a good student. And more importantly, this is the program that basically showed me the rest of these programs that I'm going to be mentioning. So the next two in particular are J+ and NCAS. And this is where I got to actually interact with scientists in the field, specifically at JPL. I got to work on a project with other scientists or with peers at the same level as me, where I got to, again, see what it's like to actually do that. And it gave me an idea of where I could go if I wanted to continue down this path. And the final program on this list, is CAMPAIR, which resulted in the summer research internship at the University of Wyoming, which again confirmed to me that, yes, I actually do want to go down this path. Next. I then, as a result of the CAMPAIR program, found myself ready to transfer out, and I was introduced to the Cal Bridge program. And this is a program that's specifically geared towards getting undergrad students at the Cal State University system to matriculate to PhD programs in the UC system. And because you have to be at a Cal State school, this directly informed me where I wanted to go for my bachelor's degree. And so, in other words, it basically said, yes, I actually want to go to Cal Poly Pomona because of this fantastic resource. In the next part. And then as a result of this, I thankfully have the GRFP, and I'm now at Caltech. And so the point here that I want to make with the slide is that there's a lot of programming that I took advantage of. A lot of it was NSF funded, but as you can probably imagine, for me, I could care less where it came from. I just knew that they were there and then I could take advantage of it, right? So next slide. I could have shown a whole nother slide of a bunch of stuff that I was involved with, but I wanted to give visual context of what this looked like and the most things that were important to me. So on the right, we have a image of me holding the 6-inch telescope that I built with my own hands as a class at El Camino College. So this is me holding it in front of the 100-inch Hooker telescope. And for those that are aware, this is the telescope that Edwin Hubble used, or that Edwin Hubble, using Henrietta Swan-Leavitt's period luminosity law for Cepheids, discovered that the universe was expanding. So it's kind of a really cool place to be there. And the point with that is that this is the only class that I know of in the country that allows you to make a telescope as like for a grade. And this was at El Camino. So as an astronomer, very, very invaluable for me. And on the left here, we have the cohort that I came into with the Cal Bridge program, where I'm going to give a rest in peace to my friend at the top left. His name is Jose Flores Velasquez. But 10 out of the 12 people in this image are all in graduate school right now. And the other 2 have jobs in industry, right? So this is like literally an example of the program's actually working. And of course, I'm here also telling you this. One of the most important things that I think that came out as a result of me being part of this program and me being at Caltech is that now Caltech is a partner of the Cal Bridge program. I think this is a fantastic step for them to reconcile with the racial injustices that the institution had been a part of in their past, as well as the promotion of white supremacy. And so I just want to step back and then just contextualize this and just say that without El Camino College and without the programs they're in Cal Poly Pomona, I wouldn't be the same person that I am today. And I'm not sure if I'd be sitting here in front of you, speaking to you all about this. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Evan. I appreciate that. And I think we all appreciated you sharing your story. And many thanks to all of our exceptional panelists for sharing their data, their recommendations, and also their personal thoughts. For those interested in more information, we will have a list of papers and other resources available on the National Science Board website, including the 2019 National Academy report that I mentioned earlier on MSIs, and full of excellent recommendations for government agencies, as well as there's going to be also some testimonies there that you can see, some videos. For board members, there is also information about NSF's activities with MSIs in your current board book. I'd like to ask the board members to please turn on their videos for the Q&A period. Please raise your virtual hand when you have a question, and I'll take first host prerogative and ask my colleague Jerry to start us off and ask the first question.
Thanks, Vic. You all were stars. Thank you so much. I'd like to turn to Twyla. Twyla, if you can unmute for my question. So I know that many students from tribal colleges that are Native Americans have such a sense of homeland and wanting to be near the reservation, that how do you manage the challenge of giving them a STEM degree that shows them a bigger world with regards to science, and yet their heart is still to remain close? And let me add to that, I'm hoping that remote work might be able to assist that we've learned from COVID, but let me turn that over to you.
Definitely. COVID has really kind of turned everything on its head here, because we were really playing catch up, quite honestly. Like I said earlier, a lot of the disparities that existed, that just kind of were glaring during COVID, existed well before the pandemic. In terms of funding, availability of technology. Even when we had our initial meeting, I was talking to you guys parked on top of a hill, so I had a good signal in terms of broadband and access to, there's a huge digital divide, and we're on the other side of it. So in terms of my students getting their degrees, a ton of them actually work for tribal nations, whether it's our own nation or if it's somewhere else. The placement of those students afterwards, after they get their degrees, is not an issue. It's getting them to the finish line and that initial part, and building up their ability to believe in themselves and letting them know that that what they think and how they view the world is actually really is valid. So a strong grounding identity and understanding of who they are provides a strong, fertile ground for learning. So there's incredible amounts of talent. There's so much talent out there. I'm affiliated very strongly. I used to be the board chair of the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, which is one of the largest organizations that supports tribal students in getting STEM degrees. So there's lots and lots and lots of partners that want our students, that want our talent. But like you said, we're very much so place-based. And there's also a huge pool and opportunity in serving the needs of tribal people, the people out here, whether it's infrastructure, engineering, research in health, just about everything. We have a lot of needs and a lot of places that we can take our students.
All right, thank you very much. Heather, you're next.
Thank you, Vic, and thank you both to Vic and Jerry for putting on this panel. It's wonderful. I had a question for a little bit of elaboration from Arthur, and also Evan from you. Arthur from your work and research, but Evan from your life experience. One of the things we focus on at UTEP, where I am, is servingness, and what are the elements that really matter for belonging. And I wonder, Arthur, if you can maybe elaborate a little bit on that from your experience as a faculty member. But Evan, if you could, aside from the financial wherewithal to have these experiences, what mattered most to you that told you belonged?
Why don't you go ahead, Arthur, first?
All right, so this idea of serving, so for our students, we try to implement, both the hard and soft skills that are needed for a professional outlook, And so it's not so much that we emphasize research goals. I mean, that's very important, but it's also the long term. And so we make sure that we foster a lot of skill sets, whether it's, hands-on workshops. And, even in this pandemic, I was able to run my own RU program live. There were some things that we had to do in a hybrid modality, but the thing was that it was very important that we had some hands-on to offer students, because without that, it becomes quite difficult to be able to translate those skills into, a practice. And so that's something that's very important, is to allow the access to opportunities in which those skill sets can be of value, that can translate into something that can impact society. So that's something we also really encourage, is thinking about the larger problems and how what you're learning today can really be of value, tomorrow.
And Evan, did you want to? Go ahead, Evan.
All right, perfect. Yeah, sorry about that. My internet just cut out. But for me, I think I think there are two axes to my answer. The first being that since I was in a program that had both Black, brown, and white students in the same space, I always felt comfortable from that respect. And then the next axis is that we were all interested in the physics, in the science, and of course, in my case, in astronomy and astrophysics, such that there's always that common ground that we had. And so this, of course, broke down a little bit once I went to these different summer research experiences where I was, the only person of color there, or even now, like me being the first Black student in the Caltech Astro program in the past decade or longer. And so what's helped me here is finding a sense of community of my the other Black colleagues here effectively. So I'm both half Black and half Mexican. So I kind of, it's nice kind of having both of those identities. And so just to step back, having the student body that was diverse and folks that I can actually relate to from a cultural standpoint. And then of course, the other axis would be having folks that are actually interested in the same thing. And in my case, being astronomy and astrophysics.
Hey, thank you, Evan. I appreciate that. Melvin, you're next.
Yeah, I have a question for Ronald Marin and for Dr. Baker. Dr. Marin, what do you mean? Could you expand on what you mean by requiring suppression and elimination of talent?
I think that was Dr. Mason you meant, correct?
Mason? Dr. Mason, yeah, no, I have that question also for Dr. Baker.
Okay. Yeah, so, we just have sliced this issue many different ways. And at the end of the day, the numbers don't lie. You have to be able to explain why the rewards that are attached to talent are race and social status based as opposed to reflective of the population. And the only way those outcomes happen is you either giving advantages to one part of the population or you're disadvantaging the other part. And much like Evan, I was the first Black in a couple of situations. But we're the exception, we're not the rule. And there's a lot of talent being left on the table, but I think if you look at the numbers and the system that we live in as a country, that talent has to be left on the table for that system to produce the outcomes that it produces.
Could you supply
does that
some
answer your
evidence
question?
for that assertion?
I'm sorry?
Could you supply some evidence for that assertion, as opposed to their historical the reasons for things that happen, but active suppression is a different matter?
Well, it may be active or not, but it certainly is systemic. When you see the structural so-called achievement gap, when you see the loss of Black and brown students from first grade to high school, when you see the lack of diversity at the board level and at the CEO levels, you know, how do you explain it? You know, how do you explain those outcomes other than the fact that something is happening along the way? And this is over years, decades, centuries, right? And the numbers haven't changed. They've been very consistent. And so at some point you have to ask yourself why. Now, if you all have a better explanation for the numbers, I'd love to hear it, but I can only think of two. Either we have a system that's doing what it's designed to do, or white people are smarter than everybody else. And I don't know of any science that proves the second proposition, so I'm only left with the first.
I have a question for Dr. Baker. What do you mean by tying culture to STEM?
I think it might be a function of untying the larger culture from the idea, or westernized science from the idea that that is the only science.
Well,
that might be
examples. Could you give me some examples?
Yeah. Let's see. Thinking about observation, they just the multitude and broad number of medicines that Native people have supplied to the entire planet. That's evidence right there. I mean, I could go off for days and days in regards to evidence, but it's just, I mean, that's one tiny piece, just multitudes of knowledge that exists because Indigenous people found it and shared it. So I hope that answers the question.
Amelia, please. You're next. Amelia, can you hear me?
Hi. Yeah, I have a small, I'd like to say hi to Evan, whom I think I still have to meet in person, even although he's in my department. But I would like to point out that, in fact, Caltech has been trying for many years I was vice president for student affairs, I should tell the panel, for a while, as well as being an astronomer. And we have been trying for a long time to, in fact, introduce a more diverse population to our rather peculiar school. Having said that, I would point out that one of the places that in astronomy that we have recognized as a resource and have for several years now is Cal Poly Pomona. And I think that the emphasis on how NSF and we as a board can help state schools like Pomona, which have actually gone out on their own and made the effort to reach other places of higher education, the UC system and Caltech, and probably Stanford as well. It's a very impressive school from my perspective. It's very important that we support these, that we make sure that that class of university within particularly California, where we work really hard on it, is really made available because it does offer access. But I had a second part for my question, which I'd like to address to Dr. Baker. Because I think there's another way to help possibly that could be used as a tool to introduce a more diverse population into STEM. I was very impressed, or at least it rang bells, when you said, I think the term you used, you said that we are observers of the world as a cultural facet. I'd heard this before in similar circumstances when I was working on environmental statements with indigenous populations in both Hawaii and California. I had to meet several times. I came to know the elders that I was in each case. I was quite terrified of the elders in Owens Valley in California because they were all women. I knew I couldn't pull anything over on them. And it was tremendously interesting because the first thing I heard in Hawaii was, we have always been observers of the skies, because they had to use them for navigation. I heard from the people in Owens Valley, I would say, what I'm trying to study is the origin of the universe. They said, we have always been studying. And somehow this theme, observers of the world, seems a wonderful logo or whatever that could be used to let everyone understand this. And you can see from Melvin's question, it's something that needs to be more broadly understood. And I'm hoping, obviously you can work more on this, but I'm hoping the board can think of ways that we can use this. Okay, but I appreciated everyone's presentations. Thank you.
If I can respond to that really quick, I love that the concept and the fact that you had the experience of learning at the feet of your elders. That's a very common theme here. And I mean, when I say here, I mean here on the reservation. Those are the knowledge keepers. Those are the knowledge carriers, and they're the ones that and therefore they have a place within this whole structure, this knowledge structure. They have things to share. They're the ones that have been observing the longest, at least within our lifetimes. They are also the knowledge bearers because they carry the stories of the elders that were handed down. So very, very important part of our learning system. Crucial, and then it's on my generation and younger generations to keep that going. So we all have a place within that system to continue it on.
For the sake of time, we have one more question. Suresh Babu.
Thank you very much for the whole. I have a question for Evan. So as you built the telescope and everything, so when did you decide to become a physicist? Going backward, can you share us that journey?
Yeah, sure. So my journey to become a physicist was always rooted in me wanting to become an astrophysicist. And so what I did was what I think every young person should do is talk to people who are already there. So there are a few really good mentors actually at El Camino that I talked with, one being Dr. Perry Hacking and the other being Dr. Susan Stolovey. And I just asked her straight up, I was like, hey, how do I become an astrophysicist? Like, I really like this stuff. She was like, oh, just get a PhD in astrophysics and follow the route from there. And I was like, all right, bet, cool, I can do that. And sure enough, later on, here we are.
So I want to thank you all for this energetic conversation. I thank all the panelists, and I thank you for you brought all your passion and your experiences. And I will say one more thing we have been discussing, and it will be at some future board meeting, is I think one way why MSIs do it very well is also because of the minority technical organizations, the fraternities and sororities. So you mentioned Twilight ISAS, Ron knows about NSB, Evan, about SOCNIS and SHIP, that. And so all of these organizations, as well as organizations like Beta Kappa Chi, the National Technical Association, places like Novache and Bea, have kept those things. And we hope at some future panel to bring those folks on to talk about how those organizations, because this is an important issue that must be addressed to both prepare diverse STEM talent and to prepare the S&E enterprise for this STEM talent. We hope that as NSF continues to shape its strategy for investing MSIs, and again, another shout out to both Ellen Ochoa and Dr. Setharaj Panthanathan for their leadership, that we will continue this conversation. Thanks again to our wonderful panelists for this thought-provoking presentations and work on this crucial issue. And Ellen, I turn it back over to you.
Thank you. And I'll thank Jerry and Vic again for putting our panel together, and a big thanks from the board to Thai-Huy, Arthur, Twyla, Ronald, and Evan for your presentations and the discussion. And we hope we can continue to engage with you as we move forward.